Joining us now is Marianne Williamson, 2020 presidential candidate, author, and who knows, might be running again. Recently opened an exploratory committee for a potential run. How you doing, Marianne?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, so I wanted to start off. Obviously, there's a big fracas in terms of should, whether it's you or anybody else, run within the Democratic Party if you're running on a presidential level, third party, et cetera. I wanted to ask you, because I think a lot of people who are just fed up and don't want to run again in the Democratic Party just look at it as the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again. Obviously, we know what happened in 2016, 2020. DNC, tossed their whole body on the scale. So if you decide to run again within the Democratic Party, why would it be any different? A lot of people think it's insanity and it's a doomed effort before you start.
Well, I think that's a legitimate point, but I think it's also legitimate to ask, why do you think it's going to be any different if you run third party? First of all, nobody knows really more than I. I have the visceral experience. I have the scars to prove it. I know what the DNC does. And in my case, I was simply a mere inconvenience, and I know the viciousness. So I'm not naive about any of that. But we have to look at the whole picture here. And I also want to point out, if you look at the Democratic Party, look at what happened even in these last midterms. Greg Cesar from Texas, Summer Lee from Pennsylvania, Celia Ramirez from Illinois. There are some new progressives in the House. So it's not like the fight's not going on there. At the same time, I certainly think third-party voices are significant. I don't minimize in any way the significance of the unholy alliance between the Democrats and the Republicans, by which third parties have been peripheralized. Abolition came from the Abolitionist Party. Women's suffrage came from the Women's Party. Social Security came from the Socialist Party. Political parties are not even mentioned in the Constitution. John Adams said they're the greatest threat to democracy. All that is true. But I also think it's naive to think if only we go third party. I know for myself, if I run, Jordan, I know that the effort on the part of the Democrats will be to invisibilize my candidacy. They will have an easier time invisibilizing my candidacy if I run as a third party. I want to be in there. If I run, I want to get to debate Joe Biden. I want to be able to actually be not easily ignored. And if I run as third party, it would be easier to ignore me, which is not to discourage people, particularly, individual races are different. There's some districts where you could get there as a third party person and it would help. But if somebody feels in their conscience and in their gut, the way I can best contribute to the fundamental change in this country is to go third party, then they should do that. But I don't think there should be this projection of guilt or this suspicion of people who go the other way. This is a whole systems breakdown we've got here, and we should use every option at our command to make a change. To me, that includes working within the Democratic Party.
And let me ask you a follow-up to that, because I can tell you, having covered particularly Bernie in 2016, they invisibilized him significantly. I remember I was at Washington Square Park. He had inside the park and outside the park almost 40,000 people, and they didn't show it on CNN. They showed Donald Trump's empty podium. So I think in terms of being indivisibilized, if you're one of the only candidates primarying President Biden, couldn't they also just ignore you then too?
Of course they will. Of course they will. But let's go back to the Bernie example, because that argues both things. On one hand, you're absolutely correct. At the very beginning of 2016 primary season, Bernie was getting the same number of people at his rallies that Donald Trump was getting. But the media thought they would get more clicks, more hits, more sensationalism out of running coverage of of Donald Trump than Bernie Sanders. Les Moonves made the pretty famous comment, bad for America, but good for CBS. We all know that. But then there's another hand on which you can't say he was invisibilized in the larger sense. He's Bernie Sanders. He has changed the ethers. Did they do him dirty? Absolutely. But it is Medicare for All is in the ethers, political ethers, in a way it would not have been without his running. There are so many things that Bernie brought to the table. His entire analysis of the way a neoliberal establishment has has suppressed and oppressed the working class people of the United States. So, if you have enough people behind you, even when the system seeks to invisibilize you, which they did with Bernie, which they would do with me, if you have enough people out there, especially on independent media, which is what we're talking about here, then they can't keep the truth down forever.
And last question on the third party element. What do you say to the argument that, well, that's all good and well, but how do you even build a third party if you don't have that first person go? You can't build it if you don't get somebody to start and kind of launch the effort, whether it be on the presidential level. You mentioned local levels, but let's talk presidential level. I agree with you. It would be a very uphill climb, likely not to succeed. But how would it ever succeed if someone like you doesn't, take the courageous stand and do it?
Well, you can't get more stardom than Ralph Nader, and there's still I think if Ralph Nader had run as a Democrat, he probably would have become president. So there are different ways to look at all of this. On one hand, you might be right, and maybe someone out there is feeling within themselves, I'm the one to do it. That's not my feeling. And one of the reasons it's not for me is because we don't have time. Even if you had someone do exactly what you just said and they were successful, the chances of they're actually getting within striking distance of the presidency, which Bernie did, are very, very small. And I think we're at a moment where rehearsal's over, grace period is over. So, the bottom line for me, Jordan, everybody should do what they feel called to do. I'm not going to live true to my heart, true to my gut on my position in one thing, but not on everything. If I do run, it's going to be living the alignment of what I feel deep within myself. And deep within myself, I feel that that's a way I can make the biggest contribution.
Democratic Party, third party, regardless. I got to tell you, I'm a journalist, but I shared my opinion during Bernie's 2 runs. I think he showed up to a knife fight holding a spoon. God bless him. But he would only go up to a certain line. There were many opportunities that he had to offer specifics on corruption regarding Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. Honestly, I think he let Joe Biden get away with political murder in terms of his civil rights record, his record in terms of African Americans, mass incarceration. I understand, his attitude was run a positive campaign, no personal attacks, but you have to contrast. You have to sometimes play hardball. And I think whether somebody runs in the primary or as a third party, for example, Zephyr Teachout, who was a surrogate of Bernie Sanders in 2020, wrote a piece for The Guardian. It was fact-based. It pointed out that Joe Biden had some corruption issues, and Bernie's campaign, coming from Bernie, totally walked it back. If you run against Biden, are you willing to go there? Not personal pot shots, but on his record, because I think the Democratic electorate was a lot of that got hid from them due to media and other resources.
Bernie is a U.S. senator. He is an institutionalist, and I think he had some assumptions, had some trust. That if Biden won, we know he wanted to be labor secretary, then was not given that position and so forth. Bernie has done so much for this country and certainly has done so much for the progressive movement. I don't want to be taking out a baseball bat against Bernie here either. We all can look and we can learn. Obviously, I can tell you this much. I have said this to many people. If I do this, I'm not doing this just to make a point. I've already made a point. And I can also tell you as a writer, if you want to make a point much easier with a lot less stuff thrown at you, you don't run for president. So if I run for president, I can tell you that much. If I run for president, I am really running for president, and that should be the answer to your question.
Well, you said make a point. Are you willing on the debate stage to point out the donors? Biden at this point is trying to privatize Medicare under the cloak of darkness. There's a lot of issues.
There's no evidence. Now, wait a minute. There's no evidence that Joe Biden is trying to privatize Medicare under the cloak of darkness. The Republicans are certainly trying to do that.
Well, no, David Sirota has reported that he's kept a lot. Biden has continued a lot of President Trump's policies that was essentially backdoor trying to privatize elements of Medicare.
Well, I have not seen that particular David Sirota coverage, but I will certainly look at it. Listen, if I run, it's clearly because I oppose the incremental approach of the Biden administration. What other reason would there be for me to do that? When you have a promise that you're going to cancel college loan debt and then just really shave off not enough to make a fundamental difference in most people's lives who carry those debts. When you promise that you were going to raise the minimum wage, and then although you do it for federal workers, you just sort of let the parliamentarian be your cover and don't fight forward any further than that. When you pass a child tax credit that for 6 months cuts child poverty in half, but then just don't bring, don't make the fight, don't go out there to permanentize it. When you don't do anything in the movement towards universal health care, when you are willing to continue to play with Saudi Arabia while this incredible war in Yemen is going on, when you have not made any statement about the incredible far-right move that's going on in Israel, when you are apparently okay with the $858 billion defense budget, when actually, even though there is money in the Inflation Reduction Act that will create new investment opportunities for green energy, all of that is nullified by the fact that between the defense budget, which is the largest carbon emitter of all, and you are willing to actually more drilling permits even than Trump did, thereby continuing to build the infrastructure for fossil fuel extraction at the very time that we should be stepping all this down. There's plenty to offer as a progressive alternative to what I see. The way I look at it, Jordan, I see the Republicans as a nosedive for our democracy, but I see the Democrats as a managed decline. I see the entire last 40 plus years as an aberrational chapter in American history. American capitalism has gone off the rails. It is unfettered. It is unregulated. It is soulless. It has caused a massive theft from the middle class and the poor in this country of both money and political power, leverage, and opportunity. There's plenty to talk about without personalizing it. But if I run, it will be to make the point that nothing that the corporatist Democrats stand for is a genuine fundamental alternative to the Republicans. It is still a corporatist neoliberal system that supports the matrix of corporate tyrants. That's what these people are. They're corporate tyrants. We don't have universal health care because of the insurance companies, which are completely unnecessary. We don't have affordable insulin and other drugs because of the pharmaceutical companies. We have disgusting poisoning of our air, of our water, as Melissa Mays said, of our food because of big ag, big food, big chemical companies, the chemicals in our pesticides that harm a child's brain, fossil fuel extraction, what it's doing to the planet, what it's doing to our air. Far too much military influence in our foreign policy because of the military-industrial complex. If we don't create an actual alternative to the Republicans, they will win in 2024. We have to do more than just talk about the amelioration of stress. We have to be the Democratic Party, or whoever is going to do it, needs to present to the American people the option of a U-turn, the option of fundamental economic reform in this country, which means a lot more than tinkering around the edges, a lot more than playing footsies under the table with corporate America in ways that the Biden administration is far too eager to do.
I want to turn to the latest black man to be assassinated by police. Obviously, there's so many more that we have not seen the video of, that we don't know their names. And frankly, I mean, we're two white people, so obviously I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm just fed up with cable news coverage and the same old shit. We need to have a conversation and better training and et cetera, et cetera. I don't really have the answer in terms of how you can't really reform lack of humanity. But I think we've had a black president in the last decade who did very little, and we obviously have had two white presidents who have done very little. The Democratic Party also basically stripped out qualified immunity out of their George Floyd Policing Act. What will change unless a potential president takes executive actions to, actually add some meat on the bone where police, in addition to criminal charges, can face civil penalty as well?
Well, first of all, he did take some executive action, but you are absolutely correct. He should be talking about it this morning. And to me, it's not only the Tyree Nichols. I'm very concerned about the Tortuguita murder. The police say he shot first, but there's no evidence of that. The body cameras were off, big shock. We have never had an environmental activist that we know of that's been killed by the police here in the United States. That happened just a week after the Tyree Nichols murder. And of course, the existence and the building of these cop cities, which is absolute infrastructure for police state. So the last thing we should be doing through cop cities or any other policy is actually giving more resources to a system that has clearly already become a rogue institution. There is talk about the George Floyd Policing Act, which would have passed in the Senate. It did pass in the House. It would have passed in the Senate had it not been for Manchin and Sinema. But as you just mentioned, it was still giving a $900 million to a system that some people say you can't trust these people when you say reform and training and diversity and giving them more money when clearly that's not working. Some of the social justice organizations are putting forth something called the Breathe Act. Senator Markey and one of the squad, I can't remember which, have
Ayanna Pressley
putting back the ending qualified immunity. But I think one of the things the president can do is use the bully pulpit on this. The American people must recognize what we all already know to be true. Police brutality. This is a very serious issue. And I'll just tell you something else, especially now that we see what's happened with the environmental activists. When Melissa Mays was making the point, so I thought very eloquently and profoundly, don't think it couldn't happen to you. I think we need to see this about police brutality as well. Once you have this kind of carte blanche, what we do is we hold individual police accountable sometimes. We need to do more than just hold individual police accountable sometimes. We need to hold the institution accountable. And it's not an easy thing to do. We know about police gangs. We know about infiltration by white supremacy groups. It's a very, very serious problem. But at the very, very least, the president can talk about it in blunt, unequivocal, and honest terms so that the people of the United States can rise up on local and state levels as well as federal. And we do need federal legislation, but we need to recognize this as the emergency that it is. When you have Black mothers who are afraid to ask their sons to go to or their husbands to go to the corner to get a pint of milk, because God forbid they be stopped at for a traffic infraction and then treated like an enemy by the police, you've got a 5-alarm fire on your hands, and we need to treat it as such.
And also, I would add, when you have protesters being charged with domestic terrorism for protesting in a tree.
That's exactly right. And notice how I'm so glad that you mentioned that. So the Georgia police had said that the environmental activists who were the forest defenders on the southeast forest there, by the way, one of the most important environmental resources that we have in the southeast portion of the United States, they said that the Department of Homeland Security had labeled them as violent extremists. And the DHS came out and said, no, we haven't. And yet Georgia did continue, as you said, charging them as domestic terrorists. All of this, and this goes all the way back to Stephen Donziger, right? These are all ways that the system is, the corporate system and the governmental system in many cases is trying to freeze environmental activism. And that goes back to you, Jordan, and kudos to you and others in independent media who, despite the fact that the mainstream media is not covering this even a fraction as they should, you're out there and you're doing it. So congratulations and good on you. And I hope that you receive all the resources you need, and also congratulations on a baby.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. I want to turn to Russia-Ukraine. I understand we're all humans. We care about the people of Ukraine. Ukraine did not invade itself. We should care about, Somalia and Pakistan and Afghanistan and not just, white countries that are invaded. But what do you say to people, myself included? I mean, it just seems like there's like a blank check here for Ukraine, but not serious efforts by Biden to actually try to accelerate diplomacy, try to make a deal. It seems like the United States is backing endless war. That doesn't mean Putin isn't to blame, but what do if you're president today, how do you end this war? Because we're sending more money to Ukraine than Flint and many other places have gotten in a decade.
First of all, the United States doesn't have the power. Neither Ukraine nor Russia are interested right now in sitting down at the table. So it's not like the United States could just say, make that happen. The money, I don't think it's accurate to say we're giving a blank check. We are giving financial support and military support. There is no doubt about that, which I support. I support the same way that other leftists in Europe support. The Green Party of Germany supports the giving of those tanks. The Europeans take a very different view of this. The left in Europe takes a very different view of this. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, the Scandinavian countries, and some leftists that I know in Europe think, I find it very odd that the left here seems to be what they perceive to be soft on Putin. So if we want to it should not be in addition to that $858 billion, which is already obscene. Take from the $55 billion that we're giving to the nuclear industry. There are ways that could be taken from money that we already have. So it should not be additional expense. But I do not agree that withdrawing support from Ukraine is responsible to democracy. It is responsible to the West. I understand. Look, I think anybody who'd be watching your program understands that the United States, in terms of NATO, in terms of the Aegis missiles that were in Poland and Romania, it's not that the United States has been blameless here. But the fact that we have not been blameless does not mean that Putin has the right to invade a sovereign country like this. The United States invading Iraq the way we did is what created the model for this kind of insanity. But that doesn't mean it's okay. The fact that the United States has so diminished our own moral authority is a terrible issue here. But none of that, to me, means, therefore, that it's okay what Putin is doing, or that the United States does not owe it to the rest of the Western alliance and Western democracy to stop this right here. In my opinion, we're going to do it now, or we're going to do it later, and it will be a whole lot worse later.
Pushback to that, you think the United States is the leading superpower in the world, who, frankly, is NATO, has no power here to kickstart diplomacy? I agree with you on Putin. I don't understand these so-called leftists on the left who are allergic to criticizing Putin. I mean, he is a brutal madman.
Very brutal.
But I would disagree that we don't have some say here, and we can't.
I didn't say we didn't have say here. I didn't say we didn't have say here.
Well, you were saying,
I didn't say that we're not the most important factor.
Ukraine and Russia don't want to go to the table. Therefore, what can we do is what I heard.
Well, right now, both Ukraine and Russia are saying, hey, wait a minute, we're winning. I mean, that's the position of both of those countries right now. So maybe you're right. Maybe the United States could say, hey, guys, stop right now. I'm not under the impression that the United States could say, hey, guys, stop right now. Let's come to the table. We're going to have a talk. That evidence does not, there's no evidence for the fact that either Zelensky or Putin would say, oh, okay, those guys are at war. And they both think that they're winning. And that's the way it is.
And last question, you've talked, I thought it was refreshing in 2020. You talked a lot about spirituality and kind of moral decay and these things. And I think it's only gotten worse. I think there's a lot of anger right now, frankly, understandable on the left. People feeling angry and cynical and desperate economically, socially. On the right, I mean, we've seen violence erupting. Fascism, I believe, growing in the United States. There's always politicians blowing smoke on campaigns about healing the soul and bridging divides. But do you understand that anger? Because I think some people who might disagree with you on running as a Democrat or this and that, they're feeling very angry and cynical and just it's all corrupt and everyone's corrupt. And I feel like they feel certain people aren't understanding their anger. So I wanted to give you an opportunity.
Well, anybody who's read my books or really read any of my issues or actually heard what I was saying on the campaign trail, I don't think they would think that I don't understand that. I think I've written books about it, and I not only understand it, but I experience it to a large extent. In 2016, there were two candidates who said to the American people, you're right. You have been completely, the system is rigged against you, and you have a right to be angry. I understand your anger. Those two candidates were Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And it was the DNC, as we know, who suppressed the candidacy of Bernie Sanders. And I think the American people would have voted for Bernie over Trump. But a woman who strides out there and strolls out there and says, let's just continue the success of the last 8 years, made many people feel, what success? I'm drowning here. Of course, people have legitimate rage. Legitimate rage at the last 40 some odd years has been a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of people. It has been sucking the juice out of economic and political and social opportunity from the vast majority of people in this country. I remember the 1970s. In the 1970s, the average American worker could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford to send their kids to college. And if one parent chose to stay home, they could. It is public policy which has changed this. It is public policy which, through tax policies, through corporate subsidies, through stock options, through so many ways that corporate America has been handed the keys to the kingdom, has stolen from the majority of people to the point where, 63% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Do I understand the anger? Of course I do. However, at the same time, I agree with Gandhi that the end is inherent in the means. Everything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. There is a level of personal anger which, while understandable, is not a success strategy. Martin Luther King said you have no morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So to me, anger as a motivation for political activism, personal anger, see, to me, moral outrage is not born of anger. Moral outrage is born of love. As a mother, I am morally outraged at what's happening to this planet, that my child's supposed to breathe. I am morally outraged about what's happening in Flint. I agree with Melissa Mays. It's happening, and I said on the Democratic debate stage, it's happening everywhere. Don't kid yourself. I am morally outraged about what happened to Tortuguita. I am morally outraged about Tyra Nichols. I am morally outraged about Cop Cities. But that moral outrage can come from, it's the fierce divine mother. The mother energy, which will do anything to protect our cubs. If it is just low-grade anger, it becomes like white sugar. And so it's like an adrenaline rush, and then you crash. This is a marathon. And if I run for president, it's going to be a marathon. So everybody needs to get, some days they're going to hit at us. Some days we're going to have to punch every day. We're going to have to counterpunch on some days. Listen, I know what they do. I know what it's like to wake up every morning and they're lying about you, they're smearing, whatever it is. But we're going to have the kind of emotional discipline and intellectual discipline. We're going to have to read Gandhi. We're going to have to read Martin Luther King. Otherwise, we won't be the people. We won't have the characterological aspects of leadership that will enable us to pierce this veil and turn this country around. Low-grade personal anger, all it will do is get you agreement from the people who already agree with you. We have to evolve to a much higher level of empowerment and the assumption of power than just that level of anger will get us. We need to be so clear that this is in honor of our ancestors, this is in devotion to our descendants, and we don't even have time to indulge in the kind of low-grade anger that will only slow us down.
And one more quick one. The media really pushed electability in 2020 for Joe Biden. I think it was a lot of hot air, but it was effective. Polls are very early, but right now Joe Biden is actually down to Donald Trump. And Ron DeSantis. I think Bernie made a mistake when asked, does he think Biden could beat Trump? He said yes. Okay, then why do we need you? Obviously, the polls are very early, but do you think President Biden is weak if it's against Trump or DeSantis or someone else?
Yes, I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about running. I think we need a genuine alternative.
Says it all. You think you'll be making a decision in the next few weeks, months?
Oh, yeah. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it, because I appreciate the conversation. And I think, the scuttlebutt's out there. And part of my decision making is discerning how other people feel about it. So conversations like you and I just had are giving me the opportunity to put out there what I would stand for if I did run. So thank you. And
Yes.
Just on a personal, not a totally personal note, on a professional note as well, I think what you do is so important. You probably remember, maybe you do, when I first contacted you, I didn't know you, but I noticed you, and I was, what you do is so important. And thank you. Thank you. I know I speak for a lot of people, and thanking you for what you continue to focus on, whether it's Flint, protests anywhere, because you're absolutely right. If the independent media doesn't do it, it doesn't get done.
Right. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. Take care.
Thank you. Good luck to you. Much love. Bye.